But while all of this is happening on the battlefield, there's something else developing behind the scenes, and it could shape how this entire conflict ends. President Trump has openly criticized NATO, calling it weak in the face of Iranian aggression. But now, that may be changing. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says a coalition of 22 countries is forming, including not just NATO members, but also Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and key Middle Eastern allies. Their mission? To make sure the Strait of Hormuz stays open, one of the most critical trade routes on Earth. Because on the ground, Iran is not slowing down. Missiles continue to rain down. Some are intercepted, but others are getting through. And one of the most dangerous weapons being used right now are cluster bombs. Even when they're intercepted, they split into smaller explosives, causing damage across a wider area. In southern Israel, 2 ballistic missiles with massive warheads hit residential areas, injuring more than 100 people and landing dangerously close to a nuclear research facility. And this is exactly why NATO is now stepping in, because this is no longer just a regional conflict. According to NATO leadership, Iran's capabilities now represent a threat not just to Israel, but to Europe and potentially the entire world. At the same time, President Trump is raising the pressure even further. In a recent statement, he warned of what he called total decimation of Iran, saying the regime has been a problem for nearly 50 years, and that consequences are coming. And all of this is tied to one critical point, the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway, but one that controls a huge portion of the world's oil supply. But here's where things take another turn, because this war is not just being fought with missiles, it's also being fought with money. New estimates suggest the conflict could cost over $200 billion, and that's on top of a defense budget already approaching $1 trillion. And now, that price tag is creating a new battle inside the United States. Some Democrats are already signaling they won't support additional funding, while Republican Senator Jim Banks argues that this money isn't just spending, it's an investment. According to Banks, this funding would go toward rebuilding U.S. military stockpiles, bringing defense manufacturing back home, and reducing dependence on countries like China. In his words, this is about strengthening America First priorities, not just for this conflict, but for future threats as well. But while the U.S. faces growing threats abroad, there's another problem unfolding at home. Airport delays are increasing. TSA agents are missing paychecks, and the Department of Homeland Security remains partially shut down. Which raises a critical question: how do you fight a global conflict when your own system at home is under pressure? Republicans argue that Democrats are blocking funding and weakening national security. Democrats argue the opposite and refuse to back certain measures. And caught in the middle are millions of Americans waiting for answers. So, while missiles continue to fly overseas and alliances begin to form, a different kind of battle is unfolding behind the scenes, one that could determine how long this war lasts and how far it goes. And what happens next may depend on a decision that has just been made. And just when it seemed like everything was about to escalate even further, something unexpected happened. President Trump has just made a sudden move that no one saw coming. In a post on Truth Social, he announced that the United States and Iran have been engaged in what he called very good and productive conversations. And because of that, he has ordered a complete pause, a 5-day delay on any strikes targeting Iran's energy and power infrastructure. This comes just hours after a direct ultimatum. Iran had 48 hours to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face major consequences. And until now, everything pointed toward escalation, airstrikes, missile attacks, growing global tension. Over the past 3 weeks, the United States and Israel have carried out thousands of strikes against Iranian targets, missile facilities, launch systems, military infrastructure. And while many of those strikes have been successful, Iran is still launching missiles, ballistic missiles lighting up the sky over Israeli cities, dozens of attacks in just days, and even now, some are still getting through. So the question is, why pause now? This may not be a sign of weakness. It may be strategy. Trump has always said he prefers a diplomatic solution, but only after applying maximum pressure. And right now, that pressure may be working. But here's the problem. We don't actually know who the United States is talking to. Several key figures inside Iran have been taken out in recent strikes. Others remain, but their influence is unclear. And according to reports, even Iran's supreme leader may be severely weakened. So who is really in control? Who is making the decisions on the Iranian side? At this point, no one seems to have a clear answer. And here's something critical. This does not mean the war is over. The pause only applies to energy targets. Military operations can still continue. At the same time, Israel is still engaged on multiple fronts, including Hezbollah in the north. Which means this conflict is still expanding. And everything still comes back to one place, the Strait of Hormuz. A narrow waterway, but one that controls a massive portion of global oil supply. If that strait is blocked, the entire world feels it. And that's why many analysts say, by the end of this conflict, Iran cannot be allowed to control that passage. Because if it does, this crisis will happen again. For years, there have been warnings about Iran, its nuclear ambitions, its missile programs, its long-term strategy. But time after time, those warnings were ignored. Negotiations happened, and Iran kept advancing. Even among allies, there are signs of tension. Some countries are hesitant, others are not fully committed. And that raises another question. How united is the West, really? So right now, we are in a moment of pause, but not peace. Negotiations may be happening, but missiles are still flying, and tensions are still rising. And what happens next may not depend on diplomacy alone, but on something much deeper. But to really understand what's happening right now, you have to go back, because this didn't start yesterday. There's a growing argument right now that Iran isn't just a threat, but an imminent one. And according to some analysts, everything we're seeing today was building for decades. Let's start with something most people never heard about. The 9/11 Commission report found evidence of connections between Iran and Al-Qaeda. Some of the hijackers actually traveled through Iran without their passports being stamped, meaning there was no record they had ever been there. There were also reports of cooperation, training, logistics, even indirect support. And after 9/11, hundreds of individuals linked to Al-Qaeda reportedly moved through Iran. Then in 2011, a U.S. federal judge ruled that Iran and Hezbollah had materially supported the attacks. The result? Billions of dollars in damages awarded to victims' families. So this isn't a new threat, it's an old one that never went away. For over 40 years, Iran has been developing its nuclear capabilities. Hidden facilities, underground sites, advanced centrifuges. By 2013, they had thousands of machines enriching uranium. And here's what matters. Once uranium reaches a certain level, it can be turned into a nuclear weapon in a matter of months, or less. So why hasn't it happened yet? Because for years, the US and Israel have been slowing it down. Cyber attacks, sabotage, targeted strikes, but not enough to stop it completely. Then came the nuclear deal, an agreement meant to limit Iran, but critics say it did the opposite, because it allowed Iran to keep enriching uranium and eventually resume full development. And in recent years, Iran didn't slow down, it accelerated. Enrichment levels reached 20%, then 60%, very close to weapons grade. They installed more advanced machines, restricted inspectors, and expanded production. At one point, inspectors couldn't even confirm where the nuclear material was. And that's when things started getting dangerous. Then something even more concerning. New undisclosed sites. Underground facilities, hidden operations, protected locations. Some of them only discovered very recently. And here's the conclusion many are reaching. They were never going to stop. According to recent negotiations, Iran may already have enough material to build multiple nuclear weapons in a matter of days, and they have no intention of giving it up. So now, you have a president looking at all of this. Missiles, nuclear capability, regional instability, and making a decision. The question is, was it the right one? So if all of this is true, then the question is no longer what is happening. The question is, what happens next? According to military experts, this conflict comes down to three things. First, Iran's military power. Second, its missile and nuclear capabilities. And third, the government itself. And while the first two have already been heavily targeted, the third one is still standing. Because in war, it's not just about weapons. It's about will. And the real question is, who has more of it? Some experts believe the only way to truly end this conflict is to cut Iran off economically. That means targeting its most critical assets, including places like Karg Island. A move like that could severely limit Iran's ability to fund its operations. But it doesn't stop there. Inside Iran, there are two major forces, the Revolutionary Guard and the regular army. And they don't always see eye to eye. If pressure increases, that division could grow. And in a scenario like that, the conflict doesn't just stay external, it becomes internal. And this is where everything changes. Because as long as the current system remains in power, the threat doesn't go away. It just pauses. Now here's something that should not be ignored. Iran's missiles can travel up to 2,000 miles. That's not just Israel. That's Europe. Countries like France, Italy, even beyond. And once a country gets close to nuclear capability, everything changes. Because nuclear powers are treated differently. And the balance of power shifts instantly. And this is why some argue that action had to be taken now. Before that line was crossed, according to officials, the decision was not made lightly. It involved military leadership, intelligence agencies, and top advisors. So here's where things stand right now. The conflict is still active, missiles are still being launched, negotiations may be happening. But the core problem has not been solved. And until it is, this doesn't end. The next few days could define everything.